A federal court has ruled the administration's discontinuation of the U.S.-Mexico border wall is a violation of environmental law. The case involved an Arizona rancher whose operations suffered damage as a result of trespassing by illegal immigrants. Roger McEowen with the Washburn School of Law joins us now with what this means for farmers and ranchers. Thank you so much, Roger, for being with us. Let's start with a little background on this case.
Well, good to be with you, Tammy. Yes, it's a pretty big holding of the court, but by way of background, this goes all the way back into the 1970s when Congress enacted the National Environmental Policy Act, which was at issue in this case. And what they said there, and this is kind of the precursor of the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and all of that. And when the government undertakes any major federal action, and that's defined as an action that would have a significant environmental impact, they have to produce an environmental impact statement first that measures and addresses the environmental cost and benefit of that proposed project. And that's always been construed by the courts. Well, I should say it's always been thought of as applying when the government does a project. And it's never really been tested as to whether that also applies and requires the government to issue an environmental impact statement when discontinuing a project that has significant environmental impacts. And that's what happened in this case.
So what all contributed to the court's ruling?
Well, they took a look at the testimony of the rancher. They took a look at the testimony of the border officials, and they said this testimony is quite compelling, that the illegal crossing of the borders by lots of people and the border agency were just overwhelmed. It created a tremendous amount of damage to ranchers along the border. And this one in particular that is the plaintiff in the case said, my fences were cut, they trashed my property, my cattle ate the trash and died, they stole water out of my wells. And the court was convinced this is a major environmental impact in that area as well as on the ecology. And the government has to issue an environmental impact statement before discontinuing that border wall. Now, the cat's out of the bag. I mean, you can't put the genie back in the bottle at this point in time. But they said that the rancher is entitled to damages for the damage caused to his ranch. And that's a significant result of this court's opinion.
So what happens now?
Well, I'm sure the government will appeal this. We're still in that time frame for appeal. This is a trial court judge in the District of Columbia, so that's pretty significant. Any appeal would be to the D.C. Circuit. I think perhaps this case gets all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court next year.
Wow. So how do you see the court's decision impacting farmers, ranchers, and other property owners near that border area? A lot of rural communities there.
Well, I think it's got to be encouraging to them. Property rights are a fundamental constitutional right. They're part of the Bill of Rights. And this court has said that you've got to consider the environmental impacts the federal government does when discontinuing a project on the environment and on these ranchers' property rights. And that's a big deal. This has got to give them some encouragement that they might get some damages recovered by virtue of the judicial system, compensating them for their extreme amount of losses.
Right. And of course, we already know that this border situation has become a major topic in the election moving forward. Do you think it'll continue to be so here as we head into November 5th?
Well, perhaps I'll have a clearer crystal ball after the election for you to see what happens. But that's going to depend on who controls the House, the Senate, and the White House. So all three. And we can talk about that in the future.
Right. Definitely an issue that will stay top of mind. That's Roger McEowen with the Washburn School of Law. Appreciate that update.